jazz enthusiasts. This is Not From This World, and I want to welcome you back to my tutorial series. Now today I'm kind of excited because I want to show you something that can come in really handy, I think, and that is HDMI lighting. And so I've talked with you about some other types of lighting in the past, and I thought I'd give you a quick beginner's tutorial on how to use the dome in your environment settings and then what HDMI is. So to find this, we're going to go to render settings and I'm going to select all. And then you remember, if we scroll down to the blue here, we will get choices of what kind of environmental mode. Now we can choose a whole bunch, and I have gone through the sun and sky only. I made a tutorial on that. But today I want to talk about dome. And we have two choices. We can do dome and scene, which will give us lighting from a dome we create, and scene lights if we want to add like spotlights or something like that. Or we can just choose the dome only, and that won't show any of our lighting that we set up in the scene. Now, just to get started here, I do have two spotlights, and I can show them to you here. So I have a spotlight kind of above Milica and to her right, and then I just have a second spotlight that is far to her right, kind of set up to her side. If I want to use these spotlights, I'm going to use dome and scene. And if I don't want to use these spotlights for the render, I'm just going to choose dome only. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to need an environmental map. And so if we drop down, we can see here under environmental map that we have this kind of weird default. And I gotta be honest with you, I didn't even really know what this was for a long time. Sometimes I'd load a scene and it would say that this DTHDR ruins picture is missing. And I was like, what is that? And I'm like, I don't have any ruins prop or anything in my scene. It turns out that it's this environmental map. And it's defaulted with this kind of weirdo picture. Let me put it up here in GIMP. So here it is in GIMP, and you can see it's this really basic kind of picture. I think it's a castle or a cliff or rocks with kind of the sun setting or rising behind it. But it's a very kind of blurry basic picture, and this happens to be your default for your environmental map. Now it turns out that if we render with dome only, I'm going to put this into NVIDIA iRay. So what's really cool is we can save a lot of memory and stuff by using this background HDRI picture. And so this default is just kind of the lighting that we're going to see for a default. So the lighting we see here is just going to be what we would see for a typical defaulted picture. And you notice that if I have the dome only on, we're getting light only from this environmental map default. If I switch to dome and scene, then you're going to see my spotlights are also working. So we can set things up and you can kind of get an idea just playing around with the character and no background at all. Now what you can do is you can look for HDRI pictures, and for example this is Daz Studio, and they have a whole bunch of different choices, and you can purchase these. Like sometimes this dramatic sky that's in 8K might look good. There is like a apocalyptic city. So these are basically backdrops without using your background. And what's cool is the lighting is going to come from these pictures. Now, you know, when you think about a picture file, we usually think of JPEGs or PNGs. So HDR is a file format that stands for high dynamic range. And so it says it's a type of photography that captures bright and dark areas in a single image. And so these are not JPEGs or PNG files. And unfortunately, when we go in, we can't just use a JPEG or a PNG to make HDMI backgrounds. So we're going to have to either purchase these or perhaps find them online for free. So these high dynamic range images are pretty different from our typical JPEGs and PNGs. These are going to be saved, strangely, as HDRs. So they are different. HDR pictures are going to have more contrast with light and dark, so you can use them within DAZ Studio to light up your scene. And that's what we're going to do. Let's go back to Milica. And what I want to do is I want to get out of this default and I want to add, let's say, a beach background to her. And she's got kind of her swimwear on. We're going to add a background of a beach and then change some settings, and then we'll have a render without actually setting up a prop that is a beach. So it's kind of interesting. I haven't shown you anything like this before, so this is pretty cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our content library, and we're going to drop down from our DAZ Studio formats to the My DAZ 3D library. And from here, once you purchase one of those HDMI products from DAZ Studio, you're going to go down here to Light Presets. This is where you're going to find it. And we can open up this and add it to our dome. So in this case, I just have this outdoor environments product, and I have a choice of backgrounds. Whenever we see the item and it's named render, that's going to be this HDR file that we can add to the back of our scene. So I'm going to do that. Let's choose one that says Maui A background. I'm going to click on it, and we're going to notice that nothing happens because I'm not in iRay view. The one bummer about this is you need to operate in iRay view. You can't see these files in texture mode, so you have to be in iRay mode. So I'm going to go into iRay mode. My computer's going to be loud during this video. I apologize. That's just kind of how it is. But now you can see that she is at the beach. We have this Maui background. Now what's really cool is this is a dome around her. So I can do a 360-degree turn, and it's all around her. There's the sun. So the light is coming from that sun, and we can use this as a backdrop prop. So I think it's really cool. And it also shows her shadow just like it would if we had a prop. So using HDMIs can really cut down on the memory that you're putting into your scene. So I now have Milica at the beach, and let's just play around with some of these settings, because some of this is really cool. If we go back to render settings and we look at some of the options that we have, now, since I clicked on this beach, if you notice, our environmental map is no longer that default. It's going to be this beach scene. So now we have the beach scene. We can change some things. It says draw dome. We have that on, of course. Visualize finite dome. We can turn that on, and this is going to make the dome finite. So we kind of have a choice here, I'll show you in a minute, of making the dome infinite or making this dome finite. So if we turn this off or on, it's going to create a finite dome. So if I go way out with my perspective view, if I'm in finite dome, you can see that this dome is finite. It's like Milica's living in this little dome world. Reminds me of Coraline. If you've seen that movie Coraline, it's like you have this finite world. All right, so what's cool is under dome mode here, we can change this. So right now it's set at a finite sphere. We can change this to an infinite sphere. And you'll notice once we do that, that now that finite little world is gone, and now Milica is in this huge infinite world. We can also set some things up where we can create a ground. So we can have an infinite sphere with ground, or we can have a finite sphere with ground. Now this really deals with moving your character around. So I'm going to go back to Milica, and you can see she's standing here. If I have it at infinite sphere and I want to move her, if I select Milica and I go to move her around, she is going to move over the dome. So like if I wanted to position her out here, now I can't do that, because if I move her, or if I move the scene, the dome is not moving with Milica. So I can select infinite sphere with ground, and now I can take Milica and I can move Milica, and the ground will move with her. So I can zoom out, take Milica, for example, and move her more toward the water if I want to. I have to admit, this is a little bit challenging because you have to just play with it forever in iRay mode. And I don't like that per se. This is one of the things I don't like about using Dome and HDMI, but it's just one of those things that you have to do. It's kind of like those decals. So if you're playing with the decals, you have to be in iRay to really see them. This is the same kind of story. You need to play around with your dome mode, whether you want it to be in infinite sphere. I prefer the infinite sphere with ground. Now, if we choose the finite sphere, it alters our background a little bit. And when you are playing with this, it's probably not going to make a big difference if you are working close up with a figure, but it can have an effect if you are working with like a large scene from far away. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so moving on, below the environmental map, we have our tint. And this is pretty cool because we can change the tint of the background really without changing our character, because this is not lighting, this is the background tint. So if I change it to a different color, we can get like a night scene or twilight. Let me lighten that up just a little bit. But you might be able to get moon glow or something like that by playing around with the tint. So the tint can really change kind of the time of day. And so by messing with this environmental tint, we can make like a dark scene. Now this is where our environmental mode comes in, because I have it set for dome only right now. But see, if I turn it to dome and scene, my spotlights are going to appear, and now I can kind of play around with maybe a dark background and Milica lit up in the foreground, and I can kind of manipulate those kind of things. So you got to kind of play around with this. You're not changing any lights when you change this environmental tint. You're just changing the background and how much light the background is producing and what color the light is producing. Then we have resolution. So you can change the environmental lighting resolution from the default. So it's defaulted at 512. See, if I knock this down to, let's say, 1, let's just see what happens. So we kind of get some different contrast. And if I go up to, like, let's say 1,000, you can see that there's some difference in the background. Not that big of a deal. We can blur the background slightly. So as this kind of renders, you can see the background is pretty clear. If I hit on for the lighting blur, it's going to blur that background slightly so that it's not as in focus, if that's what you prefer. We can rotate the dome. So if we don't like the lighting, so like if we look at what the lighting is right now, Maybe we want more of a direct lighting without moving Milica around. We can rotate the dome. And as we rotate the dome, you'll notice that it changes where the light is, but it also moves our picture. So we can adjust where Milica is standing by rotating the dome. So that's kind of cool. So the ground texture scale is going to change the clarity of the ground. So I believe it's defaulted at 100, but if we change it, we can get more detail in the ground. Right, then we have our ground position mode. We can set it to auto or manual. So manual, you will be able to move it around, I believe, yourself. Auto, it automatically does it. We can turn the draw ground on or off. So we have some ground texture, position, origins. We're not going to really get into that. You can kind of manipulate the picture using those tabs. And then as we get down to the bottom, we have our matte fog and ground fog. And I did a tutorial on these before, but they're pretty cool because if you turn like the ground fog on, you can get this fog, and then you can manipulate the fog and make it heavier or lighter. So check out my tutorial on this because that's pretty cool. Same thing with the matte fog. If we turn that matte fog on, we're going to get a dial that we can scale and get that fog either really visible or not so much visible, I suppose. The brightness also. So check out that video on my fog if you are interested in that. All right, so as I'm working on this, I've noticed you can tell that she's kind of being bleached out. And that's where our environmental intensity comes in. If you notice that it looks like your character's kind of bleached out, there's too much light coming through this HDMI background. So what we want to do is we just want to decrease this intensity. So it's defaulted at 1. I'm going to knock it down to 0.5 so that it kind of just brings out the color of Milica a little bit better. I think that looks better. That's totally up to you. But as we kind of play around with this, you need to adjust that intensity. And certainly before I render, I'm going to knock that intensity down to 0.5. Another thing to think about also when you are working with these is you can move these files wherever you want. I personally don't mess with them because I don't want to screw up my DAZ Studio, to be honest with you. So what I do is I just leave them in this light presets under my DAZ Studio library. I just remember where they're at, and I've got several different types, and I'll just go in and kind of play with them. For example, I can put Milica, into a forest scene. Of course, her bikini's not going to work that great in a forest scene, but I can do that, and then she's kind of, looks like she's in the trees now. We'd have to go into render settings and rotate that dome so that we can get her in a position that we like. But, these HDMI images are pretty cool. You can mess with them. You can get a cool looking render, and you can render an entire scene with this dome and not use a lot of memory. You won't have to deal with a bunch of lag time. Like you can see that I'm moving my scene around even in iRay mode really easily. I can take my character, I can move her around, and I don't have to worry about all that lagging. The drawback, though, is you can't work in texture mode. You've got to work in iRay mode, unfortunately. And, you can't manipulate your background. This is just a picture. So, like, for instance, I would love to be able to put footprints in the sand where Milica's walking, trying to kind of bury her feet a little bit in the sand. That kind of thing isn't as realistic, but it does allow for shadows and things like that, which is great. So this is just another thing that you can play with to try and enhance your scenes. All right, that's going to just about do it. I'm going to render up a picture for my thumbnail with my cutie Milica in her bathing suit. There's nothing better than that. And we'll call it a week. So I appreciate your patronage. I'm getting close to 1,600 subscribers. If you're someone who watches my videos and you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing that. It helps me out. Check out my videos, like, subscribe, and give me a comment or two. Tell me what you like the most about HDMI and what challenges you see. I just kind of touched on it. I didn't go into a lot of detail, so I hope this was thorough enough for beginners. And just let me know what you like to do with it. And until next time, have a great day.